These enemies must be defeated.
Try this on for size. Time out.
Ooh, is it getting hot in here?
We got this.
The enemies have been defeated.
Alright guys, this is All-Day81 and I'm going to be giving you guys another Marvel's Avengers video. So this video I'm going to be giving you guys is going to be a build video for Black Widow, and it's going to be on her range build. So I know a lot of you guys have been wanting and waiting for me to post her build, and for those of you that have watched in the stream on me using her range build, you would know how pretty much how hard I worked to try and get the most pieces that I needed for her, but I've also seen how good she was even without all the pieces that I was still missing for her. But for the most part, I mean, this build, in my opinion, is definitely better than the melee build. It's not better in terms of like boss damage, but in terms of just clearing out mobs and clearing hives and doing everything else other than a boss fight. The range build is just 10 times better. I mean, one, it's because it's safer. You're at a distance from the enemy, so you don't have to worry about getting hit by no AoE attacks or melee attacks or whatever it is that enemies would normally do to pretty much screw you as a melee build. I mean, this build is also a lot easier to get crits because a headshot and weak points are auto crits, whereas with the melee build you do have to rely on having crit chance in order to get those crits. And then, I mean, it's just easier to use. I mean, you're not worried about doing anything. The only thing that can happen is you can get blindsided because you're zoomed in when you're aiming in, unfortunately. But I mean, that's why you kind of have to just like move around a lot. Even as a range build, you can't really just stand in one spot. But anyways, we're gonna go ahead and go right into the build. Alright, so first things first is your stats. So we're gonna be focused on 4 main stats. Might is not going to be one of them. Might just happens to have points in it because it was not an accident, but it was something I couldn't avoid at the moment. But the 4 main stats is going to be precision, proficiency, valor, and intensity. Anything else you don't need to focus on. Your 2 main stats are going to be precision and valor. Your 2 sub main stats are going to be proficiency and intensity. And then if you happen to get points into resolve, resilience, and might, it's not going to hurt you. It can help you. Resolve and resilience would be more beneficial over might though. And just because this is a range build, it's not a melee build. Most of the time, you're not going to be meleeing pretty much anything. You're 99% of the time you're going to be moving away from a target that's getting closer to you. And then, but yeah, you want to mainly focus on precision and valor. Get them to around 200 to 230 on precision and valor on those stats. So you'll be around 1600 range or 1500 range damage to 1700 range damage. And then for valor on the heroic effectiveness, you want to be at least over 1800 heroic effectiveness, pretty much heroic effectiveness damage or whatever you want to call it. But heroic effectiveness, you want to be at over 1800 on that. 1800 to 2000. You can be a little higher than 2000, but for the most part, you're not going to end up really getting there unless you invest more into valor. And then the crit damage, as long as you're over 250% crit damage, you should be fine. And then intensity, the reason why you want intensity is just so that way it's easier and it's easier for you to proc your status stun meter damage. Obviously, you're not going to really be able to build up the stun meter damage because it seems like that one takes a lot longer than it does to build up status. And by the time you do build up the stun, the enemy's going to already be dead. Now, obviously, if you're running a melee build, the stun is going to be more beneficial than the status. But on the range build, status is going to be more beneficial. And the reason why is because you can apply status pretty much to multiple targets with your high caliber rounds and plasma mixed together. It's just going to be able to spread to multiple enemies, and it just builds up a lot faster that way. So it's going to be really good. Plus, I mean, you get status resistance as well, so that's a bonus from that. So the first gear piece is going to be the melee gear. For the melee gear, you want to make sure you have precision, valor, and proficiency, like I had said before, or precision, valor, and intensity, or just precision and valor. Now, for the perks, these 3 perks are terrible. Obviously, the first and second perk doesn't matter at all for range build, but it's the third perk that it comes down to. This one, like I said, is terrible. The one you want to have is either going to be Stealth Breaker for the 15% increased damage when invisible, or Shadow Ops Flare. So with Shadow Ops Flare, you get 135% crit damage while your Shadow Ops is, active, or I guess you're overcharged. Your intrinsic bar is full. When that's full, then you get 135% crit damage increase. This is going to give you the most amount of damage as much as possible. Obviously, this isn't going to be the more beneficial piece because it's precision and resolve. This one is precision and valor. So I'd be losing a lot of base damage just without the Shadow Ops Flare. With Shadow Ops Flare, it's gonna be close. I mean, it's gonna be better, but the fact that I'm losing like 20 to 30% crit damage, base crit damage alone without Shadow Ops Flare is really bad. Obviously, that's gonna be the piece that you want to have though, is Shadow Ops Flare with precision and valor. Even if it's like 30 to 40 precision and valor, if it's 20 less than what you already have, or 10 less, then it's still fine because you still have the right attributes and the right perk. So next up is going to be your ranged gear. So your ranged gear you want to have is going to, well, as you can see, mine has valor and proficiency on it. It's not terrible, but the rolls on that came with it is pretty much god rolls. Proficient buff, plasma AE bullets, and expert buff. So I get a damage buff anytime I do a ranged power attack, which is basically me just charging my shot. And I'm using high caliber rounds, or high caliber shot as well. And that's what the second perk is going to be based off of. Plasma damage is going to be applied when I'm using a high caliber shot. So as long as I charge my shot, I have 18.6% chance of getting the damage buff. And then also if I get a kill on the enemy's weak point, or pretty much weak point headshots, then I also have an 8.7% chance of getting a damage buff. Obviously, they're not going to stack those because it's just damage buffs, but it's still nice to know that you can get the damage buff just from that alone pretty easily. Now, obviously, the Valor it's pretty much max. It's 60, and then Proficiency is 55, so those are really good rolls to go with. I don't have precision, so that is some damage that I do lose out on, but I think overall it's perfectly fine if I'm not running a precision attribute on this piece. Up next is going to be the defense gear. So as you can see, it's going to be proficiency and precision this time rather than valor and proficiency. Now, it is unfortunate that I don't have valor on this piece instead of proficiency, but for the most part it's not bad having more crit chance and perk chance. And obviously it's nice that I get precision on this piece as well, just so I can make up for the loss of precision on this piece. Now for the perks, this is really good. The second and third perk don't really matter too much, but the first perk is really nice because I'm always dodging anyways, especially as Black Widow, you're always going to be dodging. So getting that perfect evade is going to be really easy to actually get. So the Nimble Spark is going to be the option I would highly recommend people going for. And then for the second perk, if you do care for the second perk, Courageous Protection isn't the one that I would go with. It's probably the critical, anything that's critical. So like critical willpower or critical buff or critical invulnerability are going to be better for just pretty much anyone, because if you get critically injured, you have a chance of proccing any of those perks. So a buff perk or the spark perk, the invulnerability perk, anything pretty much is really good to go with. And then, I mean, there are other things like Jarvis berries as well. So, like, if you get the Hive Mind Vest and it comes with, better stats than what this one came with, then it can also be a really, really good option to go with because, I mean, like I said, these are really good stats. If that might came with precision instead, then I may have actually ended up using this instead of this. But the Nimble Spark Vest is still a really, really good chest to go with. Up next is going to be the Heroic Gear. So Heroic Gear, I have Proficiency, Precision, and Valor. So I have all three that I need pretty much, which is perfect. And then obviously they're not at the highest rolls, they're like mid rolls, even though it's a 5-star. It's 35, 34, 42. I think the best you can get is like 45 on all three. And then, but the perks itself isn't all that great. I wouldn't recommend these perks necessarily. The Rampage Protection is actually not bad, but for the most part, I don't care for the first perk on a range build because the first perks are generally melee based. And then the second perk, this one, I wouldn't go with the takedown ones because I generally don't even go for takedowns. Takedowns is more of a melee build thing because your takedowns are based off of your might, your melee damage, and you're not going to have much anyways. What I would recommend is something like Spectres, not Spectres, man, never mind. Something like, where is it? I think, yeah, this one, Lightweight Blessing. So as you can see, Assault Spark is really good because it has a 22.6% chance activating an Assault Heroic grants a Heroic Charge Burst for all heroics. So basically if I use my Assault, my Widow's Bite ability, if I use that all 3 or 4 times, that's 4 different chances I have that can give me Heroic Burst Charge or Charge Burst for my Invis or my ult. And then Berserker buff is a really good perk, but not something that I would go with on a range build unless you're using like the SMGs, but instead going with the Rampage buff. So I don't have a Rampage buff anywhere, unfortunately, but a Rampage buff is basically just like this, except it's 3 kills, consecutive kills in a row, gives you a damage buff. So it's basically the defense buff switched with the damage buff. That would be what I would highly recommend going with perk wise. For again, for the attributes though, it's pretty much perfect. Alright, so for the major artifacts, it's going to come down to 2 artifacts. It's going to be the Ring of Nibelung and the Tactagon. So when you're clearing ads, when you're doing like just basically just doing hives and stuff and not an actual boss fight, then the Ring of Nibelung is something I would highly recommend going with. Even if you're doing the Tame of Titan and you're on the final boss and you're doing the Warship boss, Ring of Nibelung would be something I'd still go with because those bosses can't be affected by status effects anyways. So the Ring of Nibelung is going to be a lot better to go with because of the fact that you're going to be generating a lot of orbs and you're going to be picking up a lot of your orbs. Plus, if you're playing in a group, or even if you're not playing in a group, your AI teammates or companions can also pick up orbs, which is a little annoying, but it does help them so that way they can use their abilities. But for, like, let's say a real team, it's going to be really good for you to proc all those orbs so that way everyone can get their abilities back. So the less orbs you have to pick up, the better for the team. Now for the Tactagon, the reason why I would use Tactagon for boss fights is because you're not going to really see that many enemies to kill to generate orbs. And I mean, there will be sometimes enemies that do spawn, but for the most part it's not going to matter that much. They're going to die pretty quick anyways without it. So the Tactagon is going to be a lot better to go with just because it's just more damage overall for yourself. And I mean, it, like I said, it is not going to be beneficial to generate orbs on a boss fight. I mean, if you can generate orbs, then obviously that would be better, but on this build you're not going to be able to generate orbs just from fighting the boss. You have to get kills, and if it's in a one-on-one situation, Tactagon is going to be better because you want to burn the boss faster. So the last part is going to be the minor artifacts. For the minor artifacts, I would highly recommend going with the named versions of the artifacts. This one right here gives me Valor, Might, and Precision, and then this one gives me Valor, Precision, Intensity. This one here is pretty much perfect for me. I don't care for the perks. Obviously, the Bountiful perk is nice, but I don't really care at all what I have for my perks. It's just mainly about the attributes. Now for this, it has Valor and Precision, which is what I need, but I don't need the Might. What I would rather have instead of the Might would be something like Proficiency, so I can get a little bit more perk chance and crit chance, or a little bit more Intensity, so that way I can still at least hit, I could possibly hit around 80 to 90 Intensity, which would get me to around 60 to 70% stun status meter damage. But I mean, for the most part, it's pretty much good right there. Obviously, I have this one as well, but it doesn't give me precision, so I'd be losing out on more range damage, which, I mean, I don't really want to do. Alright, so now let's go ahead and go over the special team. For the support heroic, you actually want to go with Shadow Gifts. I know a lot of people, including myself, would go with Night Terror because there's a 25% crit chance increase, and if not that, then you'd probably end up wanting to use Darkthorn. But the reason why you're going to use Shadow Gifts is because when you go invisible, you have a 35% chance to drop heroic orbs, and it seems like it's pretty much every time I get a kill. Pretty much every single time I get a kill, it drops a heroic orb. I don't know why, but it just seems like it does, which is why this perk or this ability passive is the one you definitely want to go with. And then the next one is going to be Mortal Cloak. Now if you're playing in a group, obviously it's going to be Mortal Cloak, so that way everyone benefits from the crit chance, the 30% crit chance increase. And now if you're playing with AIs, then just go with Eclipse, so that way pretty much everyone in all your companions are stealth, because they like to kind of wander off on their own and do their own thing sometimes. You can either go with Eclipse or you can go with Visus Obscurum, I think that's what it's called. With this, all they have to do is they have to just touch your invisibility, and then they're invisible for 5 seconds outside the radius of being invisible. Now, if you trust your allies to do damage, then obviously Mortal Cloak is the better passive to go with. But for me, when I'm playing with AIs, I just go with Eclipse. Next is going to be the Assault Heroic ability. I'm going to be going with Taser Dart, and the reason why is because it just does a lot more damage single target wise. Obviously in a group setting, the super static dart is going to be a little better, but the reason why I don't like using this is because sometimes, or a lot of times, it just ends up launching the enemies away. It'll shock them in place for like a few seconds, and then they just fling across the map somewhere else, and it gets annoying, and I'd rather not have it be like that, so that's why I chose Taser Dart. Obviously, Lightning Fist is not going to be an option. Next is going to be Lethal Bite. So the reason why I went with Lethal Bite is because it's an extra charge instead of going with Invigorating Bite, because with Invigorating Bite, you have to get a kill with the Widow's Bite, and it's a 20% increase of your heroic energy being charged back when you get a kill with the Widow's Bite. And then the Paralyzing Bite, I'm not going with this because I'm not worried about stunning the enemy. That's why I ended up going with Lethal Bite. For my ultimate heroic ability, I'm using Galvanic Bite. So when I'm using my ult, my Widow's Bite is a lot stronger by 20%. And at first I was using the Vanquishing Surge, just so I had a 15% chance to drop the regen packs for myself and my team. But I decided not to go with this. I was only using this in the Hive, the Mega Hive, just so I can give myself a little bit more survivability, but I just realized, I said, you know what, I don't really need this, plus I have Kamala, so it doesn't really matter. And then I am using Indomitable Force. So the reason why I'm using this is because it gives me an extra 30% damage resistance. So you already get a 15% damage reduction or damage resistance when you activate Power Surge. So you're getting an additional 30%, putting you at 45% damage resistance in total, which is going to be really, really useful, especially against those laser type enemies, I don't even remember, the Prime Synthoids, the ones that just shoot lasers at you and spam you, stagger you, whatever. Indomitable Force is going to end up saving your life. If you don't have it, I would highly recommend using it. Now for the mastery, I'm using Intrinsic Ability. Or in the Intrinsic Ability, I'm using Overcharged Ranged, so that way when I'm overcharged, I do 10% more range damage. And then I'm using Intrinsic Charge, so what I have a 15% increase in my charge rate versus using the headshot charge, giving you just a base 25 points, which obviously this would be better in terms of building up your intrinsic, but you'll have to remember that not every enemy is going to have a head. This is only applied to enemies with the headshot or the heads. And then for the third perk or the third passive, I'm using Heroic Overcharge. For this, I mean, you can either go with this or the Efficient Overcharge. I personally would go with the Efficient Overcharge instead because of just the little downtime that you have. This will allow you to still be overcharged while you're kind of searching for your next target. And then for my range, I'm using Cluster Grenade, so that way it's a bigger radius, making it easier for me to just hit multiple targets with the cluster or with the grenade. And then I'm using Flash Freeze grenades just so that way when the enemies are slowed, it just makes it a lot easier for you and your team, making it so that way they move slower, they do their ability slower, gives you and your team more time to kind of prepare for that attack or just get away from that instance. And then I'm using Recoil Compensator. Obviously this is just preference. I'm using this, but I wouldn't recommend the reload speed because all you have to do is just switch your weapon and switch back, and then you're basically avoiding reloading. So it's going to come down to using extended magazines or Recoil Compensator. For invisibility, I'm using Invisible Ranged. The reason why is because it's a 12% increase in range damage in total. That's a lot of range damage increase. The invisible status is a good second option. The reason why is because there's a 20% increased status damage, allowing you to apply the status damage faster. But we're not really going based off of status damage. Plus, you already have some intensity already, so you don't really need this anyways. And then for the second perk, for some reason it just always turns off, but I would recommend going extended invisibility just so you have a 2-second increase in your Veil of Shadows. And the third perk is going to be critical damage. You get a 15% increase crit damage while invisible. You can either go with this, or if you feel like you wanted more crit chance for ranged attacks, then you can go with critical ranged. You have a 7% chance or increase in crit chance while invisible using ranged attacks. And then for the utility, it's going to be Heroic Takedown Mastery. I mean, this is pretty much an obvious reason. For the most part, anytime you do takedowns, you get a Heroic Orb. And then for the utility, I went with range damage. So it increases my range damage by 10%. It's just my base range damage by 10% over going with the stun damage, because like I said, we're not worried about doing stuns or doing takedowns in general. And obviously for the critical headshots, we're not worried about this one either, because we're not always going to be getting headshots. Now obviously if there are enemies with heads, which I guess 90% of the enemies do have a head, this is going to be a little bit better. But I mean, I think base damage wise it's just going to be better, especially when there are enemies that don't have a head but they do have weak points. And then for the third perk, it's going to be, I mean, whatever you want. You're not going to be really focused on using any of these anyways. I guess you can go with Critical Juggler if you're good at juggling an enemy with your gun. So yeah, so that's pretty much it for this video. If it helped you guys out, go ahead and leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions or concerns as well, let me know down and I will try my best to help you guys out to the best of my ability. If you have any other, like, I guess, perks and attributes and other things that might help you or help me with this build that you think would be really good, then let me know down in the comment section as well. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it with this build video. Like I said, it's, in my opinion, one of the better builds to go with on Black Widow, just because it's just so much stronger and it's a lot safer to use in terms of, you know, doing hive missions or elite missions, etc. Obviously, if you're doing a boss fight, it's still a really good build for boss fights, but the melee build still kind of reigns supreme on boss fights, just because you can kind of kill the boss in a single use of invis. But yeah, that's pretty much it with this video. Hopefully it helps you guys out. This is all Danny Day 1, and I will see you guys later.
Does the cape help when you fly?
It is a custom garb on Asgard.
So, no then.
It often gets in the way.
AIM scientists are fighting AIM forces. They want to defect. Help them.
Now I'm mad. What a waste. Time out. Bet that stings. Not your smartest move. Bye for now. Good night. Enough.
The scientists are safe. Sending them pickup coordinates so they can evacuate.